in general, right? So have that in mind if you want to come next week. Yeah, so today we'll be listening to the site-to-site project, site-to-site VPN project that was done by Group 2 or Group Site-to-Site VPN. I see some of the members are there. I don't know who is presenting today, or maybe the people presenting. Please just come up and let me know you are there already.
Yeah, hi, this is Akwofese. Good evening, Banjika.
Good evening, Akwa. Nice having you. Yeah, right. So please just feel free to come up shortly. So let me see. I hope I have sharing right. Yeah, so Akwa will be talking about what was done during this project for the last 3 months. And I think without much to do, Akwa, you can take this away. Yeah, feel free.
Okay, greetings, fellow WIrfon members, wherever you are in the world. Good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, whatever the case may be. Thank you for being here today. We're going to run through a brief presentation on a project that we did sometime this year. So together with myself, I have Mrs. Chila Harriet available in the team, and some other of my team members here, Mr. Rudolph Mangabell as well, all who I'll introduce during the course of the proceedings, and we'll just run through that. So I'll just run through this presentation, which would take about, say, between 40 to 50 minutes. At the end of that time, there'll be some questions, some time for questions, which I hope you'll have plenty, and we'll do our best to answer those questions. So I hope you enjoy the session. I'm just going to share some information with you right now, and I'll just run through what we're going to do. Okay. Right. So this is a site-to-site VPN project. And just to cover the agenda, what we're going to cover today, I think the first thing we're going to do is just really to cover the aims and objectives of this project that we had. What did we really set out from the beginning to achieve as a whole? I'll next go on and introduce the project team, who are the key members who are involved, how the whole thing was set up. And before we dive into the project itself, there'll be an opportunity, which will be, I think, for those of you who have heard about project methodology or the way which projects are conducted, maybe a good ed memoir or revision, or for those people who have never heard it before, at least it'll be a good introduction, which that will be presented by our Scrum Master, Miss Colette Berry. And then following from that, we'll actually delve into the project itself. We'll look at a number of areas there, from the stages, from the timeline, which the whole thing took place. And then we'll start looking at the individual areas, which are called sprints. We'll also examine as well to some very unique areas like the team communications. How did we go about doing this, since primarily we're all doing this remote? And the very last thing we'll do is that we'll just summarize in terms of deliverables, what we were able to really achieve out of it. And then we'll get onto the more interesting parts of the discussion, in my opinion, which is the lessons learned. I mean, what did we actually gain from this whole process? Why did we do it? Did we actually achieve the things that we actually set out before? And what can we improve? What can we do better? So that would more or less sum up the whole proceedings for today. There's just a last bit of information here, which is just really sources of information where the actual project actually came about, and then we'll run it from there. Okay, so that's the agenda, and I'll move on to the project's aims and objectives. Now, when we embarked on this project, I think that when the team looked at this, there were 4 different aims that we had. I think the chief amongst them was actually gaining practical experience. Now, getting practical experience on AWS services. I think one of the things that which we found, I think anybody going through being a member of WIrfonCloud is that we have prioritized education, prioritized people getting certified, getting knowledge of the cloud, and people come from all walks of life. So, but having done that, and we want to emphasize that people get certified to and moved into jobs. But one of the key components to doing that is by you having practical experience actually working on the cloud. And this project was actually designed to do just that. The second element that we had in mind was working in an Agile or Scrum environment. Now, I'll get Ms. Colette to actually review that in itself, but that was quite important because it gives us a realistic scenario as to what happens in the real world when we have these kind of projects. How are they really conducted? And the Agile framework or Scrum methodology is one of those areas which is seen as being very prevalent, especially in the IT industry and the software industry. The third element was building AWS architectures using a whole host of online tools. Now, if you're doing a practitioner or you're doing an architect associate, I mean, we are actually learning how to become architects, but architects need a range of tools in order to do their work. So part of this exercise was actually to get ourselves familiar with some of the tool sets that we had here, which we're going to talk about. And the last element of this, and I think which was one of the most important, is all about working as a team, the whole spirit about collaboration. How can we come together, bring our minds together, put our hands together so that we can achieve a common objective and deliver this project to its rightful conclusion. So those are the aims and objectives that we started here. And I think hopefully by the end of this session, you'll see whether we've tried to achieve that or not. Okay, with that being said, I'll then proceed now to introduce the members of the team. Now, when we're looking at the project, I mean, same with our colleagues in the serverless team, we're set up exactly in the same structure. So we had a product owner who was really the main guide, who was Banjika, who was there to oversee the overall conduct of the project. And that in itself was closely supervised by our Scrum Master. Our Scrum Master, a very important person led by Ms. Colette Berry, who was there to ensure that the various stages that were actually following the actual project framework that we had in terms of Scrum. And then we had the members, us, the people in the development team, made up of six members, as you can see there. So there's myself, our professor, who is speaking, and then there'll be Miss Harriet, who you'll later hear from, and there's also Rudolph Mangabel, Pride Achu, Guy Noel, and Lady T, who are all part of this endeavor. So that being said, having seen all of this, I think it'll be good for us now to more or less summarize or look at how this project framework actually looks like. So I'd like to call upon Ms. Colette to actually give us an overview of the Agile framework. If she's around, you have the mic.
Yeah. Hello, Akko. Unfortunately, Colette just indicated to me she has some emergency to attend to. So I'll try my best to to give I know many people are looking up to this. I'll try my best to give to say how Scrum works. And then I think we can also share the YouTube video she did introducing Scrum, which was a separate video for those who want to follow up. So Lady Anna, I will appreciate if you just get that video and share the link. While I just talk a little bit on this, I think this is the slide that we have. I'll just try to give some information on that, right? And hopefully I'll represent her well. I'm not really a Scrum Master, but yeah, I've been in scenarios or teams that work using Scrum methodologies. So so for everyone looking at this slide, it shows how Scrum works. So just think of when you think of a project, right? A project is always taken and broken down into maybe different stages, which you will be seeing them being referred to as sprints. So you have the whole project. You don't just go and try to do everything at once. So what happens is you may take a whole project and then you may decide that is different task. The project is broken into simple or subtask, right? And then at the beginning, a certain number of, so if you have, let's say, 10 tasks, you may decide and start with about maybe 2 or 3 tasks because you want to achieve a particular stage. So you may realize that this project is a very big project. You have stages. You decide to break it to stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, which are referred to as sprint 1, sprint 2, sprint 3, and sprint 4, for example. And then when you finish the first sprint, it enables you to move to the next sprint. And then when you finish the second sprint, you move to the next one. And after each sprint, you achieve a particular goal. So in such a way that when you finish the last sprint, which is sprint 4, you'll be in a stage where you feel like, you've completed the project and the results will be the end goal. So that's just a general overview. But who are the people present in here? So if you look at the diagram here on the left side, we have the product owner. Right, the product owner is working with a stakeholder and kind of like he's in charge of the different subtasks that you can think of, which is always listed in what is called a product backlog. So all the tasks that you will come across or that are for that project are always placed in what is referred to as the product backlog. Now you have the development team. As Akwa did indicated, for this project, they had a development team. And the role of the development team, along with the Scrum Master, is they will always have a sprint planning where they decide that from the different tasks that they have, which are the ones that we can start addressing soon, right? Something that will give value once they finish those. And then out of let's say you had 10 tasks in the product backlog, they decide that for the first sprint, they are going to take 3 tasks, and that will move in what is called the sprint backlog, right? So the developers along the Scrum Master, they do a sprint planning. They agree that 3 of the tasks are going to move to the sprint backlog. And once it goes to the sprint backlog, they start working on it. So the developers will be working. And what will happen is that they'll be having, normally you say daily in the normal Agile methodology, you have daily stand-up. So maybe every morning that will happen. In this project, you hear from Akko how this was structured, but normally you have like daily stand-ups where developers come to talk about the tasks they are working on, the challenges or the difficulties they're having, or if there are any showstoppers, so that everyone is aware and know that, okay, yeah, we're having issues here. How do we address them? But they have what is called the Jira board, which is like an online platform where they are able to take these tasks, they are able to comment if they have issues, so that you don't need to meet physically, but while this is being updated on the board, you can come across and see that, this developer is having these issues. But then there's the daily stand-ups where all these discussions also run. And the Scrum Master is helping to ensure that, to hear from the developers and see how she can facilitate the work of the developers. And so that is the real issue and of the real point of how the developers work, having daily scrums. And once they have successfully finished what was required for that sprint, you have what is called done, and then they come at the end and they will have a kind of a sprint review and a sprint retrospective, trying to understand what was it that worked well during the sprint? How can we improve how we're going to work further? They'll have a kind of conversation. So lessons learned, so that when they go back to do sprint 2, they should be able to do it in a much better way. So this continues. So maybe after taking 3 tasks from the main product backlog, having that in a sprint backlog, completing it, and then they will then go back again and seek to figure out what are the next tasks that they can take from the product backlog. So there will be another sprint planning. Some of the tasks will move again to the sprint backlog. They will continue having daily scrums. They will work on it until they will finish. And of course, that's always, the sprint is always, in this case, it was for 2 weeks. And before 2 weeks is over, they have to complete that. So that is a kind of, I've just explained it from the way I understand it, and I'm sure that at least gives you an overview of how the Scrum methodologies work. If Colette was here, I'm sure she will have dived deeper and maybe also help throw more light in case I've missed certain things. But if you are really interested in Scrum, which is one of the frameworks that is used now in almost most jobs, because this idea of splitting things into small, doing this sprint planning, having conversations have shown that it's much more effective and efficient. So this is almost one of those things that you find happening in different industries. It's not just in the technological field. So we'll look at the chat. I think you have the video Introduction to Scrum by Barry. I would recommend that everyone look at that video if you are interested, to just catch up on that. While we hope, Barry will she's still here with us, and she'll still be talking about Scrum in the days ahead. Those who are doing the Scrum challenge surely also have a good captive. I think that's what I can share, Akko, and I hope that did help. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Banjika, for that. That was brilliantly done, and a great, a brief taster of what Scrum is all about. And hopefully you'll get to see it in action as we move. So at the next stage right now, I would like to call upon Miss Harriet to talk about the next stage of this. So bear with me one moment, please. Okay. So we're going to be talking about side-to-side sprints. So Ms. Harriet, you have the mic. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Akko. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for being here. I'll continue from here. I'll be talking about the side-to-side sprints. We had 4 sprints, and the first sprint, we had to provision the environment using the cloud. Sorry, I have a cough. Using the cloud formation template that was provided to us. The second sprint, we had to attach the transit gateway. And the third sprint, we had to configure our IPsec tunnel configurations. While the last sprint, we had to test the BGP routing and testing. And we're going to see all of these as we move forward. I'm going to be taking us through to the next stage, which is going to show us the timeline that we had throughout the sprint. We started in June. We had June, July, and August. It took us 3 months. And the first sprint to the second sprint took us June to July. We started the third sprint in July. And the fourth sprint, we also started in July. We finished the third sprint in July and started the fourth sprint in July. And August, we finished the last sprint. It is 5 years because sprint 4 had an A and a B part. So if we look from the previous slide, we noticed we had just 4 sprints. But this new slide is showing we had 5 sprints. That's because the sprint number 4 had 2 stages, stage A and stage B. That's why we can find 5 sprints here. So I'll be going to the first sprint, sprint 1A, which is setting up the AWS environment using the CloudFormation template. And the CloudFormation template came with a VPC, and it had a subnet with IP addresses assigned to the subnet. It had instances. And if you look to our left, we're going to find our architectural diagram that shows what the first sprint, the A part of the first sprint was all about. We can see that we had the cloud, the AWS cloud is indicated. We have the virtual private cloud. We have our availability zone A and availability zone B. And in our availability zone A, we have an instance, and a route table is attached to that subnet. And in availability zone B, we also have an instance and a route table. These route tables help for communication. If you want to get to the instances, you have to pass through the route tables for communication to get into the instances. So I'm going to be moving to the next stage, which is the sprint 1B, creating simulated on-premises 1. Sorry. The CloudFormation stack was used to create this. And we created the on-premise side, the gateway, and we also provision an on-premise route servers. If we can look from the architectural diagram, we see that we've also created the on-premise router 1, which helps to route communication to the servers, to the first server, the on-premise server 1. Then we have the second router, the on-premise router 2, which helps to route communication to the server 2. So these 2 routers are going to be functioning and helping us in the communication between the corporate data center and our on-premise data center. I'll be moving to the next slide, which is showing us the architectural diagram of the first stage. We've seen the stage Spring 1A, which was the AWS environment, where we created a VPC, subnet, and instances, and stage Spring 1B, where we created the on-premise data center. We had we created remote on-premise gateways, 2 gateways. We had the on-premise router 1 and on-premise router 2, and we also provision on-premise router servers. This shows us all what we've been seeing in Spring 1A and Spring 1B. If you can see from the diagram, we have a simulated on-premise. We created an Ubuntu server. We have the on-premise section. We have 2 routers as indicated previously, router 1 and router 2. We have 2 servers, server 1 and server 2. While in the AWS side, we have the 2 availability zones. We have AZ1 and AZA and AZB, where we have subnets and instances launched in each of them. We had an instance A and instance to instance B, and our route tables attached to these subnets to ease communication. We also have a router that also helps in the communication between these 2 subnets. And on the AWS side, we attached a transit gateway, which we can find here for the first sprint. As we move further, we're going to see what we're going to attach on the on-premise side to ease this communication between the AWS side and the on-premise side. And I want to let us know that both sides were done in the AWS console because we didn't have a real scenario to use. So we used 2 different accounts which were produced to us by the CloudFormation stake, of which I'm going to be guessing that is a production side, and the production side was the AWS side, while the a minute, please.
Sorry, are you all right? Have you got what you need, Harriet?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Sorry for that, please. The CloudFormation stake had 2 different accounts in the AWS environment. And I'm guessing that the 2 accounts had a production account and a management account. So the production account was the on-premise side, while the management account was for the AWS side. So we did everything in the AWS console since we never had a real scenario to do an on-premise data center. So I'm going to be moving to the next stage, which is the, please can you go to the next slide? Thank you. The next stage is where we had the production, the project execution, which is the sprint 2. In this sprint, we provisioned the transit gateway, which we didn't see in the sprint 1. In the we had we provisioned the transit gateway in stage 1 with the AWS side, while in this sprint we're going to be attaching the ASIS to the transit gateway, and then we're going to be setting up the IPsec VPN tunnels on the on-premise routers. Remember, we had routers that were created, 2 routers. So we're going to set up the IPsec VPN tunnels on both routers. And we can find that in our architectural diagram, the illustration that we have the transit gateway. We have 2 transit gateways. One transit gateway is attached to the endpoint 1 and endpoint 2, while, okay, sorry, we have the transit, it's just one transit gateway, which is attached to both endpoints. The section below is just for the customer gateway router 2, while the one up is for the customer gateway router 1. We have the transit gateway, which helps in the communication process. We can see the customer outside IP. We have the IPsec encrypted public internet, and then we have the AWS outside IP. So we have both outside IPs and from the AWS side and the customer outside IP. Both have to work together in order that the communication moves smoothly. Then we have the AWS inside IP, while we also have the customer inside IP. The outside IPs work out in the environment, while the inside IP helps in the communication that works inside the environment. That's for the customer gateway router 1. For the customer gateway router 2, we have a 2-way communication from the endpoints, the 2 endpoints, endpoint 1 and endpoint 2, to the customer gateway router 2. Next slide, please. And just a reminder, the IPsec VPN tunnel is just an encrypted tunnel set up over a public network or internet. Okay, our next stage is the project execution sprint 2.
Okay.
In
So,
sprint 2.
Harriet, let me just add to this. So as what Harriet was just saying, this slide here just shows that we created the IPsec tunnels, but when we created the IPsec tunnels, there was no traffic in here. So when you see the tunnel states, which we have shown here, the IPsec tunnels were down to show that there was no traffic actually going through. So whilst we had already set up the channel, the IPsec tunnels, there was no traffic going through. So we could clearly see from the top here that we had 2 live VPN connections, which we had set up as stated for the endpoint 1, for example, but the status of those the tunnels themselves were not live. Okay, so we would show in the subsequent sprints how we enabled that so that we could configure it. So we just wanted to show this screen capture here, and I think it was during a session which myself and Harriet were actually conducting this, where we actually saw that we had set up the VPN connections, but at the same time it clearly indicated that the tunnels were not up. Okay. All right, over to you, Harriet.
So after I was supposed to take the sprint 1. I'm sure it is your turn to complete the stages.
Okay, thank you very much, Harriet, for that beautiful description of sprints 1 and sprint 2. So as we can see from the end of sprint 2, what we've successfully done is that we have established 2 VPN connections between our AWS environment and between our simulated environment, which are in place. But there's no traffic running through. So as we go into sprint 3, what we'll find in sprint 3 is that we have to actually configure now the IPsec tunnels. Now, what I'm showing you here right now is actually what I would say is the configuration set of each of the on-premises routers. So if you recall from the diagram, we talked about router 1 and router 2, right? So in setting up router 1, for example, we had all this base level of information. And for anybody who is very familiar with data networking, that you'll find that a lot of this information is quite familiar to you. You would notice that, and as what Miss Harriet highlighted, was that we had 2 different types of IP addresses. So we had an inside IP address and we had an outside IP address, right? And there's a very good reason for that, in that the outside IP address represented the IP address that was associated with the physical interface on both sides of the VPN tunnel itself. Now, and when we talk about the inside IP address right now, that is actually related to the actual VPN tunnel, which sits within that interface. So it's kind of like a pipe within a pipe, being the best way to describe it. Yeah. So, but the reason for showing you these 2 things is to show that in actually setting this up, we need to know what the various IP addresses are in order to configure this correctly. And at the same time, it's very important for us to also have what is known as the BGP settings, which takes on a very distinct IP address. And because this is very much a secure environment, you'll find that there's a pre-shared key at either end of the tunnel. So you can see that for every setup that we've done for router 1, each router actually sets up 2 tunnels. So let's go back to where we are. So as you can see here, there are 2 tunnels. Router 1 has 2 tunnels, yes. And the main reason for those 2 tunnels is just really for resilience. So if one tunnel fails, then the other tunnel can be used as a backup. And it's the same thing too for router 2. We set up 2 tunnels. So that clearly explains why we have these 2 sets of IP addresses, one for tunnel 1 and the other one for tunnel 2. When we look at router 2, it's the same setup again. Right. So you get to see how much information we had to capture, and then we had to use that to configure the settings in our router and on the simulated environment, and also on the AWS environment. Okay. Right. So now we're in sprint 3. So we're covering the IPsec VPN tunnels. So as we mentioned right now, we have set up the VPN tunnels in a way that the tunnels are active, but there's no traffic that can actually go through it. So we have to set it up in such a way that traffic can actually go now between the 2 endpoints. So as you can see here in this diagram, when we ended sprint 2, what we did was that we set up the VPN tunnels. So the 2 tunnels set up between router 1 and the AWS endpoint, and then those 2 VPN tunnels set up between router 2 and the AWS endpoint. And at the end of router sprint 2 as well, what you also were able to establish was that we connected our availability zone A and availability zone B to our transit gateway. Right now, the star of the whole show really is a transit gateway, because it's a transit gateway right now that enables these 2 availability zones to actually communicate now with the outside world. Yeah, so that's why the transit gateway is extremely important. So in doing this, what we had to do right now was to complete the configuration now that would enable now traffic to go through these various tunnels. So when traffic can go through these various tunnels, that would allow server 1 here to connect to instance A, and would allow server 2 here to connect to instance B. But it will also allow server 2 as well to connect to instance A if we need to, and server B to also to connect to server 1. Okay, so in effect, what we're doing here is setting up that live environment, that live network. So we're setting up a network now that runs over the public internet, which is a secure environment. So these locks here specify that the connection is secure, so that the traffic there is confidential, that is going to be running between our simulated environment and the AWS network. Right, so that's what we're able to do in sprint 3. So sprint 3, we set this up to allow traffic to run between these VPN tunnels. So we completed the IPsec configuration. It was one of the most important parts of the sprints that we did for sprint 3. So having achieved that, then the next stage really was for us to then move to sprint 4. Now, sprint 4 was all about setting up the to complete the connection, and the best way to do that was to set up the BGP settings. Now, the AWS network is a public network. Now, when public networks, if you've done anything to do with networking, when public networks are communicating with each other over the public internet, the protocol that they use is BGP, so the Border Gateway Protocol. So a protocol is just really a means, it's just a means of communication, which 2 entities, which 2 routers use to establish a connection, right? So they use BGP. It's kind of like very much a specific language which the routers will understand. So that's what we needed to do before we completed this, because it's one thing to set up a tunnels to set up a tunnel to communicate. It's another thing to make sure that at least the tunnels, the routers on the on-prem and at the AWS endpoint will understand each other. So herewith we have another diagram which was drawn by us, but what you can see here is that it's no different from what we were in sprint 3, but The only difference that we've been able to achieve is that we have enabled BGP. So when you have BGP, what does BGP actually do? BGP allows you to announce what you have within this the AWS environment. It allows you to announce that to the outside world. And when you have BGP enabled on this side of the on the simulated environment, it allows this environment here, all that belongs in this environment, it announces it to the outside world. So AWS can learn about this on-premises data center, and this on-premises data center can also learn about this AWS environment. Okay, so exchanging of routes, it's like a map. So in the end, when these routes are exchanged, these routers here, they have like a map. So if at all you want to send traffic to this corporate data center, then you have a routing map which is there, which has been made possible because of BGP, right? So that's where we really got to understand the importance of networking in this whole thing. So we established that the IPsec connections, like a bridge between over the internet, and then the BGP that will enable us to exchange the routes. So if at all instance A here wants to connect with this server 1, it can do so because it has a routing map which is within the transit gateway that knows how to get to on-premises on-premises router 1. If on-premises router 1 wants to talk to the AWS network, it has a routing table which it has learned using BGP in order to get to the AWS network, right? So that's where the transit gateway is a very, very important device. Sorry, because it behaves like a router. It operates at layer 4. It enables all the AWS environment here, the two availability zones, to communicate with each other, and at the same time it facilitates the connectivity to our simulated environment. So that's what we were able to do when we enabled the BGP settings. So once that's been done right now, all we are left to do now is to prove that the connection is alive, that this connection actually exists, and that these entities can communicate with each other. That's what we're left to do. So as the end part of sprint 4 was for us to actually show that. So I'd like to show you something here. So this is the transit gateway. So remember, I was telling you that the transit gateway behaves like a router, right? So it has a map. And what you can see here is that it has all the routes. So we looked at our transit gateway, went to our transit gateway, and then we actually examined all the routes. So as you can see here, there's a transit gateway as part of our VPC settings. Yeah, we went to the transit gateway routing table, and it listed all the various routes you can see, right? And the very interesting thing is this. I would just like to highlight two things for you. You see this resource type here. It says VPN. This tells us that the network, the AWS network, has learned about these two subnets, right? These two subnets right now are only possible because we have learned about it through the VPN, right? So that is very important. That is very important for us because it shows that the AWS environment, it actually knows about our on-premises subnets, which are there, right? So that is why when we look at the resource types, we see the VPN. This other association here, which is the VPC, this just tells us that this subnet here is native to the AWS environment. And this subnet is attached to the transit gateway, which is part of the VPC, which is part of the VPC, but that is native to the AWS network. And these other subnets which are present here are all strangers or learned. They are learned. There are subnets which are learned, which are not part of the AWS network. So that VPN there indicates that it is not part. If they were part of the AWS network, then would have had it designated as VPC, right? So what this whole process helped us to do was to help understand what it is that the routing tables was trying to tell us, and also to tell us that BGP was actually working in a way. Yeah. So with that being said, that we understand that BGP is up, is available. We understand that our AWS environment is learning about our simulated environment. The next thing to do for us was to check that we could actually connect the two elements. We could actually prove it. And how did we do that? Yeah. The best way to do that is by using a connectivity test, right? And the connectivity test we used was to use a ping. So when you use a ping, what you do is that you go onto your particular designated device. So in this case, if you're looking at the on-premises one, so on on-premises one, you go onto that router, for example, and you decide to ping. You decide to say, okay, a ping is kind of like you want to make a telephone call, for example. You want to ping one of these availability zone instances. So in this case, at the bottom part here, we said ping 10.16.32.110. This is one of the servers, the instances, which is on the AWS network, right? So when we ping it, we got these results. So what you find here is that it sends kind of like a certain number of bytes over the internet, and the time recorded for that byte to go and then come back, which is called the round trip delay, is indicated here. So you see that you have a connection, you have the times, which are about 3.99. I mean, it's more or less all within, let's say, 3 milliseconds, between 3 to 4 milliseconds. This shows that we have connectivity from the on-premises data center to the AWS instance. Now, if we decide to go now to the AWS instance and we want to connect to the remote VPN to the simulated environment, this IP address here, 192.168.11.30, is a server that is at the remote or the simulated environment. So when we ping that as well, we get these results, right? So I think you see here 5.35. Okay, that's a bit long, but in the end, it stabilizes. So it starts taking now more or less a route, which is more or less the same. So these two things just tell us that we're able to achieve connectivity between the AWS environment and the remote data center, and we can connect from the remote data center to the AWS network, right? So these are the screenshots that prove that we're able to do that. So in so doing, what did we finally achieve from this? I think we did many interesting things, but I think the key thing that we actually learned in the process was actually to set up an AWS VPC. Now, to be honest with you, I mean, part of that was done for us because we were actually using a CloudFormation stack. And as you know, a CloudFormation stack is really just a means by which you can just simply repeat something as many times as you want. So you set it up one time and you can repeat it as and when you want. The second most important thing that we learned from all this was how to configure a transit gateway. So remember, I was telling you the transit gateway itself acts like a router. It allows your AWS environment to actually connect to the external world over the internet. So we learned how to do that. And you could see as well how we were able to look at the transit gateway and see that we're learning routes. We're seeing all the routes that were available, which that environment could connect to. Yeah. The third point, which was very, very interesting, was actually setting up that simulated on-premises environment, which Harriet was talking about. Now, we did that using an open source routing protocol, which is a Linux-based kind of router, which is called FRR routing. So FRR is a means by which you can more or less set up a router on a server somewhere. So if you want a router right now, you can use now FRR routing, which is a Linux-based routing element that can give you router functionality, right? So we're able to set that up as part of this process. And the very last bit, anyway, this was something to do with networking. So but very much common with the cloud, in that whenever you want to connect your AWS environment, you can do that two ways. You can either do it, with direct connect, which is a permanent connection between your AWS environment and your on-premises location or your data center, or you can set that up over the public internet. So we actually did that using the IPsec VPN tunnels. So that was very interesting for us to do. So we're able to achieve these four things as a result of this process. And the majority of that was all to do with the network element and working very closely with the transit gateway. So that was very satisfying as part of the whole process. So with that being said, how did we actually handle communications during this time? And as we mentioned, we had 6 members who were all remotely. We don't live side by side. It was very interesting. We had 3 members who were based in Cameroon, and we had 3 members who were in Europe. So 1 in Belgium, 2 in the United Kingdom, and 3 in Cameroon. So what was the means of communication that we had? So you may have heard, you may recall Banjika talking about Jira. Now, Jira is a piece of software which helps teams actually plan, assign, track, and manage projects together. So Jira is such an element. So this Jira platform is a platform which was more or less overseen by our Scrum Master. So she set this up, and it enabled us to actually manage the sprints. So we're able to conduct the sprints from this Jira board, right? So as you can see, you could see what the roadmap was. I mean, you can see here from an indication here what the timeline was. So all of us could come to this Jira board. We could see the timeline associated with each of the sprints. At the same time too. Hello? Okay. At the same time, what we also had as well was this element of backlog, as Banjika also mentioned. Now, the backlog is there are elements for us to actually find out what we are still missing. So at every different sprint, it may be that certain things were not addressed, or certain things may still be outstanding, right? So the backlog is just to help us to be a reminder, an aide-memoire as to what things that we need to finish or accomplish before we go to the next sprint. So even if we move to the next sprint, we can still deal with items which are on the backlog, right? And the second element which we used really was for Telegram. But I think, in all honesty, Telegram was used for just personal interaction between the members. And the only thing about Telegram is that it didn't really capture the discussion between members. But what we found with Jira was that it had a communication platform integrated within it. So when we're talking about the project, the record was there permanently, which we could all come back. And if anybody had something which they wanted to refer to on the project, they could relate it directly to some very specific things. So it gave us better flexibility in terms of managing our project and working together compared to Telegram, for example. And the other thing it allowed is that everything was all in one place. So all our documentation was in one place, all our diagrams were in one place, all our discussions were in one place. So, but to be honest with you, we weren't using Jira very well in the beginning, but subsequently, as we moved on, we started to get a little bit better at it in the way how we used it. Okay, well, this is where we come now to the lessons learned. What were the challenges that we faced? Now, I think the biggest thing, and we've covered that in the past, really was communication between team members. I think to begin with, and to be frank with you, we didn't really understand how the importance of the Jira board. So communicating between our members was a bit challenging, especially understanding what it is that we needed to do at various stages, because we're so dependent for the beginning on Telegram. And we had to be very much prompted by our Scrum Master to say that, no, use the Jira board. That's why it's there. So that's one of the challenges that we did face at the beginning, but we improved as we got along. The second thing, which is very important, is internet connections. So my dear colleagues in Cameroon, Ms. Harriet, Mr. Rudolph, they face some very, very big issues with internet connections, be it maybe due to power or for whatever, or the quality of the internet links. So that in itself impacted on some of the execution of this, because if at all you don't have access to the AWS console from which you can actually deploy this environment, then it will be one of these things. And I think as part of a project, if people are facing issues, these are the kind of things that need to be highlighted along the way. The third element, which was also very crucial and which did impact the way how we did things, is that we didn't have a common account to implement this architecture. So what happened was that everybody then had to implement this architecture, this project individually, which is kind of counterintuitive, because the whole premise of us coming together is that we should actually work in just one environment. So unfortunately, we did not. What the serverless team successfully did was to have a common account. We didn't succeed in doing that as part of this team. But I think the way that we tried to overcome this in the end is that we designated one person upon which we'll be implementing the architecture during our Scrum sessions, our Scrum meetings, doing it that way. So I was a designated person through which, I mean, when we had our Scrum meetings, which could be anything from about 40 minutes to about 90 minutes, we actually went through the whole emphasis of building things so everybody could see how everything was done on just one account. And the last point, and this is just life, at times, you have a project or you are working in real life, people are absent. Your members are absent. It could be for a variety of reasons. People are sick, people have family commitments, you name it, or people don't turn up. So that's just a fact of life when we're dealing with the projects anyway. You have members that have to be absent, but that doesn't mean that the project doesn't go on. It just means that the people who are there will have to just find the means in which they can come up. And that's where communication becomes very important. So this is just really a frank account as to, the kind of challenges that we faced when we're actually delivering this 6 weeks project, right? Now, what are the kind of things that we actually learned? What are the good things here that really helped us very much? I mean, we've covered some of that in the deliverables. But one of the great things that we're able to do was, configuring these virtual and on-premises routers. Now, you won't get that so much when you're dealing a lot with the cloud, but part of this project, we're able to really do that. I know that somebody like Rudolph was very, very excited about and very interested in understanding this new space of things. We understood this whole element about pinging, actually testing the connectivity between two entities, between the AWS and the simulated environment. We understood as well similar to the first point, this client software SWAN, which is an open source thing, which is based on the FRR protocol of elements. So that was, a new element for us, which we learned. So if next time, we encounter this kind of thing, we're not going to be, faced by it, so that, oh, what is this? Yeah. The fourth and most important point really was really understanding the Scrum framework and actually applying it. So, I mean, we're honest to say that in the beginning, the first kind of like 3 weeks, we just didn't get this at all. We're just doing things like we normally do, or doing things through Telegram. And we had to be reminded quite a number of times that, look, you have to trust in the process. And follow the Scrum process, attend meetings, have Scrum reviews, have Scrum stand-ups. That was drilled into us at the end of it. And the very last point, which was very good, was that we had experience working on the Jira platform. Now, why is this important? The reason why this is important is that Jira is a tool which a lot of software companies and a lot of technology companies and a lot of IT teams use, which is out there. I mean, I can say that I first encountered Jira as a result of this project, and and strangely enough, by the time I started work, which was the same time as July, I was seeing that in my company that I work with, we're also using Jira. So it was very much a brilliant introduction as it was. And so I think when you look at this, there are just so many highlights of what we really got right here. And I think the last 2 points really just confirm it in terms of the collaboration and in terms of working with a tool set, which is, which companies are actually using. And even the customers that I deal with at the moment also use Jira. So if you have the opportunity to use Jira when you use Scrum, you'll find that you're using something which is quite used widespread in the industry. Okay, so with that being said, I think we've come to the end of our presentation. There are just some important links for you to know as background information. You want to know more about this, I'd first of all really refer you to Adrian Cantrell. This is a project which he came up with, which we have adopted as part of the WIrfonCloud, and we more or less set that up within the framework of a Scrum methodology to that effect. So I think if you want to know more about how the genesis of this project, you can look at those links. And then the rest of the other links are just links which are associated with WIrfonCloud. So by all means, I mean, this will be on we'll be talking about this on our LinkedIn pages, we'll be talking about this on our YouTube pages, and on the WIrfonCloud element itself. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention. On behalf of Sheila, Rudolph, Pride, Lady T, and all, we are very, very appreciative of your attention today. So we're open now for questions.
Great. Definitely, before we go to questions, a big thank you, Aqua and team Harriet, for that presentation, and the entire members of the side-to-side VPN. I know that we have so many new people here today who may be looking at these terminologies and getting a bit frightened. This was a little bit high level, but I can guarantee you that if you remain very consistent and you continue to work what we are offering you, you will be able to do something like this in a year's time and feel very comfortable. If you look at this project, maybe for some people, they may see like, okay, yeah, I can maybe go ahead and do this in maybe 3 days, or and finish it as soon as possible. But the beauty about it is every step was drilled in such a way that every member have a good understanding, because the aim of the project is you can take this, go to an interview, talk about it, you can be asked questions about this, and you should be able to talk in a confident manner. So that's why it took a bit long, and then bringing all the tools that you use in a real life setting to make sure that if you finish this, you put this on your CV and you can go to a workplace and talk about it without doubting what you are talking about. So kudos to everyone in that group, but I really still want to say we are very happy to have you, Aqua, especially in that team, because you have a networking background, and then and I know how helpful this was, especially for the members. So yeah, thanks so much for the work you did with the team here. So yeah, please, I think maybe more comments, or you want to clap for the team, please feel free to come and give a hand clap, and then please feel free to bring your questions. Yeah.
Well done.
Yes, I can hear those claps, and I know many people are still shy on mute because we asked you, but please feel free to give your comments and to ask questions, so that the team is still here to answer.
Yeah, thank you. I found that very, very moving, and like Ban said, we are extremely pleased and privileged to have Aqua with us. And those connections, all the comments, the way he's described everything. In fact, me too, I think that I'm proud to be part of this team. The team that can even listen from the background and appreciate the good work that's going on. So, in fact, I'm very, very pleased that it's happening amongst us. So thank you. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
That was
I'm on
Freddy or
invitation.
Emmanuel?
That was Fred.
Ah, that was
Yeah,
Freddy. I
Freddy,
thought so.
I'm on
Yeah,
the
thank you,
trip
Freddy.
to London, so I'm, yeah. Okay.
Nice, Freddy. Yeah,
Okay.
thanks so much. Yeah. Mhm.
Akko, thank you very much for the presentation, and it was really awesome, high level. Please, I don't know, can you walk us through again about the BGP, the border gateway protocol, how it was used, and just talk about generally about BGP in detail. That's the first part of my question. And then the second part is, I know this one, you are an expert in networking. The routing of the whole network. I would like you to talk about the routing, how you conceptualize the whole networking thing of the thing, and then to put it in place. Thank you.
Yeah, see, just a moment. Yeah, before Akko coming. So, Emmanuel, sorry, I think, yeah, Akko will surely throw some light there, but we just also try to make sure that it's kind of like appreciative for everyone, right? So we don't have a networking session at the moment. So maybe one thing is very certain that if you notice, we are starting the networking for the practitioner next week. And yeah, in the course for the associate, there's also a model on networking where most of this will be drilled. And I'm sure some of those questions will be answered. So let's first of all just pick general comments, general discussions. And if there's time, Akko will come back to that, Emmanuel, if you won't mind. So I see Clotilde has her hand up. Maybe she comes up with her comments, and then those two, then I think Akko can come in. Yeah, go ahead, Clotilde.
Hi, I'm really impressed with this. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Great. Yeah.
I'm really impressed with this presentation, and it kind of reminds me about 2 weeks ago when we had the mom. I don't remember her name very well, when she said she has a background in networking. And I was like so excited that she was joining WIrfonCloud, and to see this in full display, a project that has taken up to 3 months and well executed and presented. I actually feel glad. My only regret is that I wasn't part of it. I mean, I would have loved to be part of this, because this to me is like gold, you know, like if you are able to talk about this kind of project within your interview, I think you're going to get hired. And so that leads me to my question. So for those of us who who did not take part in this project and who are really interested, I know that maybe probably a new session will begin for projects, but this it's a really good project. So is there a way that this concern can be addressed?